If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who spend a lot of time working in isolation, research stations, etc., what are your creepiest experiences? I work at the Discovery Channel telescope in the middle of the Coconino National Forest. A typical night is usually myself, the telescope operator, and an astronomer. One night, during hunting season, we had a curious elk that was wandering around the security fence perimeter. We could hear it bugle over the audio feed from the observation deck and hear it crunching around when we went outside. This lasted for about 30 minutes before it finally wandered off. About an hour later we heard several gunshots nearby. Bad because there is no hunting for 1.5 miles around the facility, sign are posted everywhere. Given that the astronomer that night was taking long exposure, ~2 hours each image, I decided to go walk around the inside perimeter of the security fence. I had my red LED headlamp on and kept seeing the glistening eyes of elk all around the facility. Seemed to me like they were wanting to come in to hide from the hunter/s. Creepy but not the worst part. Did the same thing about an hour later, walked the inner perimeter and looked for the eyes. They were all gone. Right as I'm about to head back and I hear someone clear their throat, standing at the entrance to the facility, other side of fence. This dude simply asked, "You seen dem elk round here?" "I've been watching them come up the hill. Really need some elk." I informed him that I haven't seen them, but he called me a liar and said I was protecting them. He sat there at the gate till twilight, then wandered off into the woods. Told the Forest Service about it the next day and they said they've had reports of a man going onto people's property and stalking prey, even going as far as hanging out on their porches. We now have IR cameras outside the observatory and heavy-duty security features on the entrances because of the weirdo. I've never told this story to anyone. In all my years as a locksmith I've been in plenty of uncomfortable situations. Domestic disputes, business breakups. I still hate Fridays even though I've been retired from locksmithing for 5 years because of all the jobs I had to do locking fired employees out. I've been in plenty of places someone would tell me was haunted. I would just think they were nuts and go about doing my job as fast as I could to get away from them. Only one time in 20 years did I ever feel like I was in a haunted place. I spent the first 15 years on the job in Metro Atlanta. I moved to a more rural area in the state for the last 5. This house was probably built in the 1930s, all brick, directly next to a main road. Still a 2-lane road mind you, just pretty heavily traveled, lots of traffic. It looked like a plain place, nothing uncanny about it from the exterior, although the overgrown shrubs and trees gave it weird shadowy places that I took no notice of at first. Inside the house was completely different. It seemed to be refashioned at multiple times but nothing ever tied together. It had an odd angular feel to it. Walking into that place you could feel the air change. With every door open it felt like air didn't move at all. Usually in my work slamming doors were a constant. I'm standing at one door, someone else opens a door in the house and interior doors slam because of the pressure change. Unblocked interior doors did not do that in this place. I walked into the kitchen and nearly scared a carpenter to death. "Fuck, I can't wait to get out of this house," he says. "You'll see what I mean." He gathered his shit and left before I got back to my van with all the lock cylinders. From the moment I walked back into the house I felt like I was being watched. It was silent, and several times I felt like something was reaching for me. That electric tingle you get watching someone slowly move their hand to your body. I went into overdrive and hauled ass as fast as I could. Job done. The funny thing was I had probably passed that place 1,000 times. Like I said, it was a heavily traveled main road. It was in an isolated stretch, and not only had I never noticed it, I realized passing it a few weeks later that even though it was obviously there and easy to see, I still managed to overlook it when I was watching for it. It's like the place didn't want to be seen. A couple of months later I get back to the shop and noticed a coworker had been there that day. This guy was a former Marine gym rat and as tough as they come. He comes in later and we are bullshitting around, and then I ask him what he thought of that house. He made a face like I asked him about his worst memory and said that was the creepiest house he'd ever been in. I just let it go, but I also never went back there. I don't really work in isolation, but most nights by the time I leave work, it's pretty late and there are very few people left around. I usually leave by myself. One night I got into the elevator alone and pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator stopped at the ground floor but the doors didn't open. Then it went to the top floor. It just started going back and forth between the top floor and the ground floor without ever stopping to open the doors. I clicked the alarm button in the elevator and got on the line with security. They were sympathetic, but the only solution they could offer was to just keep trying different floors until the elevator stopped. So that's what I did, but I had no luck until I tried the second floor. In my building, the second floor is famous for how creepy it is. The elevator area is the only area that looks finished, the rest appears to be under construction yet completely abandoned at the same time. The elevator area has dark, blood red walls and very dim lighting. This is the only lighting on the entire floor. Even when the elevators aren't going completely haywire, they'll stop on the second floor and open the doors every now and then without any explanation. It's been that way for the last 3 years I've worked there, at the very least. So, of course, it's only fitting that my runaway elevator would finally stop and let me out on this creepy-ass floor. Security told me to just wait there for them to come get me. During that crazy elevator ride, I kept thinking this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but I was wrong. Those long agonizing minutes of standing there, alone, on the second floor, squinting into the dark corners of that evil place were the most terrifying moments of my life. The elevators still inexplicably stop on that floor from time to time. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but if I did, I'd say there's something on that floor that wants to get people. Used to be a night janitor in a movie theater. We would go in at 4 and clean until the doors opened at 11. To save time and our jobs, we would sometimes come in around the time the last movies were finishing and just sleep in one of the empty theaters, making sure we would be there when the shift started. Our basic mo was to use electric leaf blowers up and down the aisles of each theater, blowing popcorn and trash all the way to the bottom, then cleaning the seats up manually for anything gross, or larger debris. This was expedient, but it was very loud, so it was easy to lose yourself in the work. Of course, the lights were on in the theaters, to better assist in the cleaning, and usually we were the only ones there at the time, so whenever something strange happened we would chalk it up to the other guy. There was one standing rule though, that we all followed to the letter: no one in the projection booth. There was no reason to go up there, we didn't clean it, all our supplies were downstairs, and most of all, it was haunted. There is a phenomenon that happens with theaters and projection booths: no matter what, you always feel like you're being watched. When you're walking around deaf, from the sound of the blowers, in an empty movie theater, and you happen to glance up at the booth, and there is unmistakably someone standing there watching you, you will shit your pants. Especially when you go out into the hallway and find the other guy in his theater working. Especially when you and he go to either end of the building, to the 2 exits of the booth, and trap whoever it was up there and there is no one there. We just chose not to fuck with it. Back in the early 90s I was working as a security guard for a large church property. This included dozens of portables, tents and acres of land, surrounded by miles of open desert scrub brush. Not isolated in today's world, but this was back when there was no cell phones, and no TV reception, no internet access. So I worked night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Also the lights on the property at night were the yellow night lights, so everything had that sickening darkness feel. Okay, so everything creaks due to the temperature changes, so in complete silence the metal walkways between the portables would crack and pop at night. Well, one night the metal fatigue starts at the back portables. I am sitting alone watching a movie on a small TV/VCR combo and I can distinctly hear the creaking start 6 portables away. And it's 3 a.m. and it's just slowly cracking closer to me. I am now looking in that direction as at exactly the sound you would hear if several people were all coming towards me at the same time. I lower the TV volume and now it sounds as though there are several smaller people coming towards me. The metal is just slowly creaking closer and closer. My rational mind states the obvious, that the metal deck has shifted and now each plate has to compensate, and therefore this is science in action. But there is a catch. I can feel something is off, like a presence of people. And yeah, let's just get to it. Children. Yep, I can sense that there are children walking towards me. So I turn off the movie and turn my chair towards the oncoming sound of the metal floor creaking towards me foot by foot by foot. I back my chair against the fence, but now I have seen the shinning, so I don't want to meet those fucking girls, so I tell myself it's time to do a patrol. I briskly walk out to an open area and then make rounds, and motherfucking sounds keep coming behind me. Now my mind is racing and I am fully freaking out. So I start doing ninja karate moves as I walk. So if you were looking at me from a camera, you would see me walking and then randomly doing a karate stand and a high kick, back kick, my version of a roundhouse kick. This goes on for hours and I now have this distinct experience of there being 5 little kids from the 1800s following me. 3 girls, 2 boys. I mean, I can feel it. This goes on all night and then I go home. Next night same shit. And the next and the next. Realizing I can't get this out of my head, and that ninja kicks and karate stands are exhausting. I finally just start talking to them aloud as I make rounds. At first I was super aggressive and cursing, but then slowly I just would be like, I'm going to the top tent, so I'll be back in a few. But the sense of the 5 kids never left. Oh, and here is the other part. After that week I started each shift with a Disney cartoon and goldfish crackers. I never saw them, but their presence never left. I did this for almost 3 years before I left for my new job. This happened a few years ago when I was working at a car dealership. Our business had just moved into a new lot down the road and the cars were parked in an open-air parking garage. One way in and one way out with one set of stairs which was right by the entrance. So I'm hanging out at the entrance and I hear a car door slam. I found it strange since no cars had driven in and no one had gone up the stairs. So I start walking up the stairs and I hear another door slam shut. I'm thinking WTF is happening? Next day I tell my coworkers what happened and they all think I'm just delusional. Fast forward a week later, I had to travel down the road to another dealership to pick up some parts. Dealership I went to had just moved out from where my company had moved in. I walked down to the parts department and grabbed my part. As I'm walking away, the guy behind the counter asks if I've worked the night shift yet at our new place. I told him I had and he quickly responded with, "Be safe, that place is haunted." I immediately got goosebumps and proceeded to tell him what I had experienced just a week prior. He said it was normal and you get used to it. Freaked me the f out. I used to work as security in a super old theater that hosted a few theater plays a year. So the shifts were usually 12 hours or more. You open and you close and you just make sure all the people rehearsing for the theater play gets in and out, etc. First one in, last one out kind of situation. It was chill because I would be sitting behind a glass wall playing World of Warcraft for 12 hours getting paid. I never got the creeps there, but it was haunted. Everyone believed so, but I was the only one apparently who believed it was a friendly ghost. The theater has offices in the 3rd floor, for example, where the old janitor 100 years ago would have his apartment before refurbished to offices. Well, every single key card to get into the main office door would get demagnetized, doors wouldn't open in general even with a standard key, and people in general felt pretty unwanted up there. No wonders when someone probably still lives there. This also happened on the doors into the foyer in the actual theater. Doors refused to open, key cards would stop working, people suddenly couldn't get out 1 minute and thought I had locked them in, while next minute the door shows no problem whatsoever and is easy to open. So at the end of a long shift, where you most likely didn't see a single other person, walking downstairs to make sure all the lights are off, there are no more people inside and the doors are shut, and while walking back to exit, you see that the whole theater scene is lit up with studio lights and there are literally no one left in the building. Might not be creepy, but it makes you question your own sanity. Lol. Worked as a lab student in Alert, Nunavut, look it up, most northerly inhabited place in the world. Was there for my second term. It was January, so total darkness. The lab I worked at was an atmospheric lab, so it was far from the main base, maybe 5 kilometers. Around the lab there were lifelines leading to all of our instruments outside. However, on this particular Wednesday, which was flasking day, it was a little stormy but nothing too serious. Since I was the student, I did all of the outside flasking. Basically, I loaded up a sleigh with evacuated flasks and would walk about 300 meters from the lab, open up the flasks, and then walk back to the lab. We then would send them south for analysis. Since we had to ensure that we got the best samples, we always had to walk into the wind. That means no lifeline. It was coming from a different direction every time. On this Wednesday I had my little headlamp, walked out, and pulled my sleigh into the darkness, the darkest dark. I was a couple hundred meters out and everything went dark. I turned around, the lab was gone, the station was gone, where we parked our truck was gone. I was alone, with only a headlamp and a sleigh of empty glass flasks. I panic. I have no radio, no phone, not that they work up there anyways, and no clue where anything is. The wind was strong enough that I couldn't even find my tracks. I accept my fate and just stay put, heart racing. This is it. This is how I die. After the longest 2 minutes of my life, the power comes back on. Worked overnights in a gas station for a summer and it was my responsibility to restock the fridges. We had a garage as part of the building, as well as a car wash. The stock room was across the shop and in the back of it was the side entrance door to the car wash. It was a quiet night and I was carrying an ambitious amount of inventory by hand. As soon as I set foot in the shop, I got the chills and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I knew that logically I was safe and that there was nobody there, but it felt like someone was walking on my heels. Another time, I was in the cashier's booth with the steel door leading to the shop, closed. There was a tiny window on the door and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young boy walk out the garage door. The overhead door was obviously closed and the path he was going definitely lead out there. I was once on a solo assignment to safely prepare computers in an abandoned medical lab to be destroyed/sold, So I had to gather all hard drives/storage devices and secure them for shredding. The lab had been closed during business hours, with patients there, blood tests running, etc., so there was still blood in centrifuges, needles that didn't make it in the sharps box, etc. I was alone in the building, and had been told there was no power, but there was running water. I needed a drink, so I started walking through the dark hallways, trying to find a sink. As I neared the bathrooms, one of toilets flushed. I bolted back to the warehouse room I'd been working in, which had an exit. I was sure there was someone living or squatting inside of the building, and called my sister, who happened to be our client contact for this project. She laughed pretty hard first, then said she did the same thing when she first went there. Apparently one of the toilets runs constantly, and when it fills up too much it flushes. A bit later I got another scare when a door slammed, but that was because the power was on, and the AC kicked in, sucking the door closed. It didn't help that the place was 3.5 hours away, in the middle of a cornfield with nothing else around, and I'd been awake since 3 a.m. to make it up there in time. To get into the building I also had to step over dead birds, that I'd imagine had flown into the windows. A coworker and I were doing some routine maintenance and inspections at an electrical substation. This facility is in the middle of the desert, about 30 miles out of town and 10 miles from the nearest main road. We were the only ones there, no other vehicles parked outside. We go through 2 locked gates and 2 locked doors to get to the breakers we need to test. When we enter the room we will be working and we hear frantic whispering above the hum of the equipment, not a conversation but a single intelligible voice. The whispers go silent as I step into the room. My coworker and I glance at each other without a word and quietly and cautiously sweep the room. This is an area that gets frequent illegal immigrant traffic, but I had no idea how or why they gained access to this building. We searched every inch of that room but didn't find a trace of human activity aside from our own. We performed our tasks and left, sharing very few words. Once we were finished and back in the truck my buddy confirmed that I had heard the voice as well. We haven't spoken about it since. Used to be a traveling manger for a very small chain of gas stations. They're all in very rural areas. I used to dread going to one in the absolute middle of nowhere mainly because I was by myself and people would come in absolutely wasted. I was too afraid not to sell them alcohol, and the cops were 30 minutes away at the very least. It was about 3:30 a.m., and one of our regular drunks drove his current girlfriend's car while wasted to the store while I was on shift. He insisted I go out with him. When I said no, he lost it and started screaming I was a lesbian, and what does that do for me? I just shook my head in disbelief. Then he started screaming that he had been molested as a child and I could help him get over that if I would just have sex with him. I did my best to calm him down, and he left. I locked up, called the cops, and the usual manager and told her I was leaving as soon as the cops showed up. It was a 30-ish minute wait for cops, and the whole time I thought he kept driving around the store. It was building built in the 1950s, so every little noise made me jump. I finally called my friend who owned a gun store in the next town over to come wait with me. I had to call 911 again to tell them I thought the guy was circling the store, my friend on his way wasn't the culprit, and he was armed. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. It was so frustrating. All they said was if it happens again to give them a call. I quit that weekend. The regular manager told me that she's lost other female workers because of the drunks at that location, but this guy took the cake. Holy shit. I was working once at a security guard for a private firm. I was guarding a small building, only 1 floor of fence/gate and a small garden. It was only 5 rooms. A main lobby, an office, and a few other storage rooms as well as a basement. I was always on duty alone at this place due to its size. I was in the lobby one night as always on my laptop doing nothing, expecting nothing. I hear a knock at the lobby doors. I head to the door and find no one. Like at all. The gate is shut and locked up tight. I check around and head back to the desk. Soon after I hear the door to the office behind me open. I of course grab my light and my gun and head to the door. It's open but no one is inside. Feeling a little freaked out I sit back down and rather than get on my laptop I close it and put it away. I sat silent in the dark, the only light I see from the street, and listened. The rain pouring outside hitting the glass, doors and roof. I hear footsteps and find no one. I hear knocking and stay put. Finally I hear breathing right behind me. I get up and do a quick 180 expecting to see someone. Nothing. I sat for hours terrified, hearing all kinds of noises and sounds, even feeling someone touch me at one point. 6 a.m. hits and I was out. I quit that job. I talked to my boss about it. He told me I wasn't the first to have that happen and that it was probably Zach. I asked who Zach was, he told me he didn't know. That was just what the first guy to quit called it. In high school I used to work at a sandwich shop that was within an old university. The layout of the store was different from most stores, and we had a huge back room with a small office and several large coolers, 2 of which were non-functional. My coworkers and I experienced so many strange things there. Doors slamming, strange noises, apparitions, you name it. I personally had a few experiences. The 2 scariest I can think of. One, since we were closed on Sundays, I was tasked with going to the store and prepping all of the food for the following day. So I'd go for a couple hours, completely alone, and prep things. On one particular occasion, the air felt different and I was immediately uncomfortable. I normally was able to be in and out with no issues, but this time was different. I tried to finish things as soon as I could, but as I was about to leave I saw this black humanoid figure lunging at me from one of the furthest back rooms. I freaked out and flinched. Strangest thing is that I felt a surge of ice cold air hitting me on the face as the creature would have hit me. I didn't finish prep and just left. 2. I was one of the first people, along with my manager, to arrive that morning. I lost track of him while finishing prepping food. At one point, I walked by the small office the manager would often hang out in, which was only accessible with a key, since money was kept there. I could swear I saw him, or something, sitting on the desk, but immediately after seeing him in the office he walked in from the front of the store. Confused, I walked to the office and it was empty. He couldn't have walked in and out of the office since I would have heard him as I was standing right there. He also had the only key. We eventually started calling the ghost stand. I never did feel fully comfortable there though. I work in a network operations center, NOC, for a medium-sized telecommunications company. When I first started I worked the graveyard shift. It was an old building in a downtown area of the city that it was in. The rest of the office was mostly B2B type of people and server rooms and whatnot. Keep in mind that there is a door with a small entryway at the front of the building that is locked, even people with keycards can't get in after 5 p.m., and then there is a keycard door beyond that, and then our room was 3 doors down from that, also locked with a massive 3-pronged deadbolt with no window, only a small peephole, looking out on the other side of the door. Only a doorbell for someone to ring if they needed in. I was working the night shift alone this night because the other guy called out with the flu. Well, about 2 a.m., 4 hours into my shift, I start hearing loud banging on the metal door, like a fucking elephant is trying to enter the room. I jump out of my skin because it was a pretty quiet night. The banging goes on for about 5 minutes as I'm sitting in my chair, frozen from fear. I looked out the peephole and there was nothing and no one there. I talked to the morning guys that came in who have worked there for years longer than me and told them about it, and their response was, "Oh yeah, that's Jim, he's a ghost that's been around for decades. He only bothers people when they're alone in the building." They said it so nonchalantly like it wasn't even a thing. I about shit myself. In college I worked for the Student Publicity Center, where we produced flyers and posters for the different student clubs and organizations on campus. It was a blast, usually. Part of the job was making huge 5x5 posters to advertise events. We would print our designs on clear plastic sheets, then use an overhead projector to enlarge and trace the design onto sheets of paper since we didn't have a wide format printer. It wasn't anyone's favorite part of the job since it took a long time and a lot of permanent marker work, but the finished product was pretty cool. Our workroom was separate from our office. It was tucked in the back of the basement of the student union down a back hallway that few people knew about. I'd often come in on weekends when the SU was closed to work on my posters without interruption since it was kind of tedious work. Plus I could smoke a joint on my way to campus, which helped make it fun. I was there one Sunday, alone in the building, plugging away with music on loudly when I felt something off, pulling me out of the focus zone I was in. I capped my marker and looked towards the door where another student, I presume, was leaning against the doorway, just watching me. He was about my age, skinny, pale and just staring at me blankly. I lost my shit and jumped up from the crouch I was in since I was inking the bottom of a poster at the moment. I asked him what the fuck he was doing, naturally. He said he heard the music and was just watching me work, in a flat way of speaking that I remember feeling weird about at the time. I have no idea how long he'd been watching or why he was in the building. He muttered an apology and left. I waited until I heard an exterior door close and then left through a different exit. I've never been so startled by another person in my life. Not really what you asked to hear about, but due to me trying hard to start a business years ago, I basically isolated myself in a unique way, just working non-stop or hours that didn't let me see or talk to anyone. Even though I was still living at home with my mom, there were huge patches of time where I wouldn't see her, come home at 10 and leave at 4, maybe a "how was your day" once a week through a closed door since I woke her up when I came home, but that was it. When I was really getting low on money, I stocked up on food by a delivery service and stayed in my shed work area, so I didn't spend any fuel. They were really efficient. I didn't even know they came until I got a text. Same with the stock delivery, everything was just put where I marked never seeing a soul. I did this for a couple of years in full isolation for about 3 months max. All of my own deliveries were made in the wee hours of the morning, so I didn't see anyone then, even if they were home. To give a little bit more context, I got fuel once on daylight hours when there were people there, so I thought I would pay by hand, maybe splurge and get a Coke. Since I just got cash via my letterbox for a job, the cashier asked, "How is your day going?" and I had to take a moment to pry my lips apart. Hadn't eaten or drank in like 10 hours, but once I did I couldn't speak, or not very well, I'd forgotten. I got out a good, but it felt so unnatural, even the words from her mouth didn't seem quite right. Anyway, since then I started to talk while I worked in an attempt to not be caught off guard like that. I'd like to think it's normal, but probably isn't. The weird thing that relates to your post is I think I developed a subconscious that can use my own voice. A couple of times during this isolation I heard an unbelievably loud stop. Or Aiden. My first name, when I was doing something dangerous. After each of these outbursts I felt ill, like a really sore throat, but also like I lost all of my energy for the day. I think a part of me knew to stop and told me that. It might be linked to an injury I had in the early part of me starting out that caused me to be bedridden for 2 months straight. I used to work for a tech company that manufactured PCBs, like the circuit boards that go inside computers. Anyway, they opened up a brand new, enormous building just across town, and they transferred my department over there. Except my department consisted of me and 3 other guys, one of which was my manager. Everybody else had quit or found new jobs. My manager had to stay at the corporate office most of the day, and my other 2 coworkers were considered critical personnel, and were also told to continue to report to the same location to work on other projects. So I moved, along with a bunch of racks of hard drives and testing equipment, to an almost completely vacant building. There were exactly 8 people working in the entire building. I don't know the exact square footage, but it took a good 5 minutes of straight walking to get from the main entrance to the back of the building. To complicate matters, all the doors were keycarded and access restricted to your job function, and since I was the only employee in hard drive testing, I was all by myself in a room for 8 hours per day. My manager would sometimes show up just to make sure I was doing my job, but it already involved a lot of waiting around, so he would really just check to make sure the machines were all running. By the time I was ready to leave for a new job, we had run dry of hard drives anyway, so I was quite literally surfing the web by myself a lot of the day. Some creepy things that would happen. I could frequently hear voices coming from the storage cages. I was the only one with a key to that padlock. The lights would turn themselves off, which was normal because they were all motion activated. But since I was by myself, I had to sometimes flail my arms to get them to turn back on when I was sitting still for long periods of time. It was always a bit startling, because the testing room was brand new but almost totally empty, so when it went dark, it went really dark. Like, I just went temporarily blind dark. I would sometimes see shapes of people in the corner of my eye when I was sitting by myself at breaks or during lunch flipping through my phone. When I turned around to greet whoever it was, they were already gone. Lastly, and the worst one that I can remember, is always hearing people knocking on the door to the hallway before my section, or trying to use their keycards on the little card reader. I would go to the door to let whoever it was in. I didn't give a shit about security protocols or anything since the rooms were all empty. But there was never anybody there, and everyone I asked said they never knock or try to get in themselves. They always call my cell phone if they need to pass by to another area. It was a cushy job, or it became one after I got moved, since I had hardly any work and no oversight, but I was glad to be out of there a few months after I got transferred. Place gave me the creeps, especially when it got darker earlier towards the end of the year. I was a night custodian at an elementary school for several years. The school itself was not very old, but it was creepy in that it was haphazardly built by the community on swampland. After everyone had left and I was alone in the building, I would hear all sorts of weird noises. After walking through and locking all the classroom doors, I would regularly hear a door slam from the opposite end of the school. My office was the boiler room, and in the middle of winter when the blower fan was running full blast, I swear you could faintly hear children laughing over the sound of the fan. When the wind picked up behind the school, it sounded like eerie flute music, like it changed pitch and had an actual melody to it. Only once did I have something weird physically happen. Admittedly, it may have just been my mind playing tricks. I had a pretty good routine that I rarely strayed from. When I would clean the big gymnasium, I would gather all my stuff, brooms, waste pan, etc., and lay it on top of my garbage can, then wheel it all through the door together. This is a mundane but important detail. I would take off the big push broom and leave it outside the door while I turned on the lights, that way I could start sweeping right from the door to the center of the gym. Only this one time as I reached outside the door to grab my broom, my hand just smacked against the bare wall. I looked out the door and saw the broom leaning against the wall on the opposite end of the hallway, the end of the hallway that I hadn't even gotten to yet. I used to do really late, overnight, experiments when I was doing my PhD. I worked in a laser lab, so it was a very large room that was sectioned off by massive thick laser curtains around each setup. So people don't get blinded if there is a stray laser beam. Anyway, it's late one night, probably around 1 to 2 in the morning. My experiment is dragging on, and I probably have another hour or so before it ends and I can begin shutting down. Now, because this was also a spectroscopy lab, the lab was pitch black. And I mean the eye can't see the hand in front of my face pitch black. Fortunately, I have a single computer monitor that doesn't output light that the spectrometer can see, at least with my laser wavelength. Now, the way the computer monitor is facing and the way the curtains are situated is such that people can immediately see me if they enter the curtains, but I can't see them even if I know they are there. The curtains are black and are made to absorb light. People have snuck up on me for fun, even stood there for minutes before they said something, or else I'd never noticed them. It's worth mentioning that the lab is also climate controlled and the AC never stops blowing, especially when we're running an experiment. We work with hot things, the climate control never shuts off, and the vents are diffused in such a way that there are no real streams of air moving around. This is to prevent dust buildup on the lasers and optics. So I'm chillin', sitting in the chair watching some YouTube or playing some Game Boy as the experiment runs. I have to check it and change physical settings every 10 minutes or else I'd automate it. Note, I have headphones on, so the lab is silent other than the chiller used to cool the laser and the hot setup. Now, tonight for some reason felt off. I didn't quite know what it was, but it was just weird. I was really paranoid, although I had no reason to be. I had done these experiments hundreds of times before. The entire building should be pretty empty at this point. The janitors had long since left and it was rare for other people to stay that late. Anyway, I finished the level I was playing and decided to switch from my Game Boy to the computer, so I had to unplug my headphones from the Game Boy and plug them into the computer. But, for some reason when the headphones went silent, I heard what I thought was the door to the lab shut. It was pretty loud. Now, there are a few people who have the key to my lab, namely my boss, my lab mates, and the janitors. But I knew for sure that all of my lab mates and boss were surely gone, and the janitors are usually gone around midnight. However, it is possible to sneak into the lab from either of the adjoining labs if they were left unlocked because we aren't allowed to lock the doors between them. Fire reasons need 2 exits to every room. Because of this sound, I ripped my headphones off, around the ear type, with pretty good sound isolation, to try to listen better, and I started looking toward the entrance and the curtains to my area. I didn't notice the curtains open, but looking up did make me realize that the curtains were fucking swaying. That's usually indicative that someone just walked past them. However, I didn't hear any footsteps. I'm thoroughly freaked out at this point, so I spend the next 10 minutes just staring at the break in the curtains looking and listening for any movement. To no avail. Now, you may not think that was freaky, but think of it this way. Who the hell was in my lab at 1 in the morning? Why didn't they say hi to me? As any of my coworkers or the janitors would have done. How long were they in the lab before I heard them leave? Were they watching me? After calming down, I walked out of my lab to go get a drink. Now, the lights in our building are on a sensor, and if nobody walks through the halls for more than 45 minutes or so, they shut off. The scary part was that the lights in the hallway were off, meaning nobody had walked through for a while. So what in the living fuck did I hear in my lab and what made the curtains move? I quickly finished up my experiment and practically ran out to my car. The next day I asked the janitor if they were around last night and he said that they had finished with my building at 11 or so. A few years ago, a friend of mine volunteered both of us at our local church to create some set pieces for their children's choir Christmas performance. She ended up bailing out last minute, and I felt bad for the exhausted people organizing the Christmas events, so I ended up doing it on my own. I was given a key to access the church when nobody was there, so I ended up spending a lot of nights until 1 a.m. there working on the set alone in the building. The church had a small gym on the main floor that you accessed through a small door. That's where I spent my time working because it had a lot of open floor space. I'd often hear loud footsteps coming from the indoor balcony in the service room, or the sound of drawers opening and closing from the kitchen in the basement level. Sometimes I swear I could hear water taps being turned on from the bathrooms downstairs as well, but I was always way too scared to check. When I brought it up with one of the organizers, she sort of laughed and said the building makes lots of sounds at night, but not to worry because it's just the wood settling and pipes cooling down and making noise. I took that explanation because I wanted to believe I wasn't spending the middle of the night in a freaking haunted church. So anyway, that's not the creepy part. The lobby had a lot of framed photos on the walls. Nothing religious, just pictures of the pastor's family, of various events organized by the church, of the mission teams on their trips, etc. Anyway, one night at around 11 p.m., I heard a loud crash sound coming from the lobby. I freaked the f*** out and froze for a solid 5 minutes. I was honestly scared to even make a sound. Lamau. I frantically called my brother and he drove to the church. He was at the front door, but I had to let him in, so I had to pass through the lobby. I came out of the gym to find all the lights turned off. I had turned all the lights on my floor on whenever I arrived because I was creeped out. I turned on the light to find every single framed photo on the floor. I'm talking dozens of photo frames face down on the ground for absolutely no reason. No windows were open, and if there had been an earthquake I would have felt it. Anyway, I let my brother in and we turned on all the lights, put on some loud happy music and cracked a few jokes as he helped me load all of my work into his car so that I could work on it literally anywhere else and never have to go back to that church alone ever. I worked as a field biologist in the Plumas National Forest many years ago. I lived by myself in a camp I set up by a lake about 30 miles from the closest town and as far up a mountain as an old logging road would take me. The location was central to my work area but absolutely about as remote and distant from civilization as you can get in that part of the world. The first week of isolation was pretty novel, but I started to experience some really creepy things in the second week. Like leaving the fire to go take a leak and coming back to find a rock on my chair. How does a rock get on my chair in the middle of the night? I think it was the next night I put down my guitar. There's not a lot to do when living in deep isolation in the woods, went into my tent, and then heard something strum the guitar only to immediately pop my head out of the tent and see nothing anywhere near the guitar. Then there was the scream. Or a howl. Or something, I don't know, but it was blood chilling and freaked me out. Most every day I worked, hiking all over those mountains, blazing trails wherever I needed to go. I carried a 9mm in the small of my back. For that week I kept it on me at all times and under my pillow when I slept. After that second week I never had another creepy experience. I think it was all just my mind playing tricks on me, creating stimuli because I had been deprived of it. But I can still hear that scream.